We have asked Nicole to join us today because she is not only a Marketing Kind member, but she's also senior consultant on innovation at Batten Hall. She has 20 years of experience in marketing, communications, and strategy with a strong focus on social media. And recently, she's been doing quite a lot of speaking at conferences on the topic of AI and social media. So we've asked her to share her take on how AI is changing social media and the implications for all of us. And then, of course, we can get into a group discussion on that. So thank you for joining us, Nicole, and over to you.
Thank you very much. I always like to start asking people to cast their minds back a few weeks. And if I assume most of you are on LinkedIn, and if you're not, you've been living under a rock. But if you have been on LinkedIn in the last couple of months, you probably remember not long ago when our feeds were full of action figures and dolls and all sorts of little representations of ourselves in a lot of cases. Marketing people loved this. And it was essentially because ChatGPT launched their new image generation model, and everyone jumped on it. They started off with Ghibli versions of themselves, but that was quickly clamped upon due to copyright issues, which is one of the problems we'll be covering later on. And then, of course, people moved instead to action figures and other things like that. It's a bit of a silly example, but it just goes to show and speak to a bigger trend, which is obviously the drive around AI-generated content that we have been seeing on social media recently. And I have lots of controversial opinions, I think, on this, but I will save some of them for later on. But for now, I've seen some figures that predict, and I haven't actually verified this, but the figures say that up to 90%, 90, of all content we see on social media next year could be curated or created by AI. So we're talking about a ridiculously large amount of content, most of the content we see online. What this means essentially is that authentic human created content will become a rarity to a certain extent, and that is how you stand out. So to my first controversial point, content creation is not the best use for AI. It's not today. It might be in a couple of years' time once AI has improved, but at the moment, I don't believe that using AI for content is the best use case for the technology. But it's impossible to avoid because all of the platforms, the social media platforms that we use, love or hate, are using AI quite extensively in the back end. So we have lots of examples of that. LinkedIn itself obviously is owned by Microsoft. Microsoft has a big investment on OpenAI, in addition to obviously having its own AI tools like Copilot. So Microsoft uses LinkedIn very much as a test bed for AI features. So if you're applying for a job using LinkedIn, you can use a host of AI features in order to improve your chances of being selected. Obviously, we know that in the recruitment sector, a lot of the actual sifting of CVs and selection of candidates is already being done with AI as well, which brings another issue, which we'll be talking about later, which is bias. It's a big one. But it's just an example, again, of how AI is being used in the back end of social media channels. And there's things like Meta trying to introduce these AI assistants across all of their platforms, which nobody wants, nobody asked for. And it's starting to get a little bit creepy. Today, I actually was reading about someone who created a Meta AI version of Kurt Cobain, who obviously has been dead for many years. And while I understand the interest in speaking to a dead celebrity, it's still not great that, imagine if you're their family, seeing someone speaking to their dead relative and asking them questions about why they killed themselves. It's just not something that we should be encouraging or allowing even. But sadly, there is very little regulation on AI when it comes to social media at the moment. So these are all some of the issues, but obviously there's good stuff as well, which we'll be covering too. So, as Paul and Anna mentioned, I'm Nicole. I do work with social media quite extensively, and I have been tinkering with AI for a few years now. I love it. I am an adopter. I am definitely an enthusiast, but I am a cautious enthusiast in the sense that I believe that there are lots of really useful, positive ways that we can use AI when it comes to the context of social media. But there are some big concerns that we need to consider as well. And I'm not even going to talk about the environmental impacts because we've covered that in previous sessions before. And that's obviously a whole topic that we can have a full session on. And I only have 15 minutes. So, a few issues when it comes to using AI for social media in terms of content. The first one is there is a bit of a disconnect between what we as marketers want, which is making our lives easier and potentially optimizing the way we work, and what consumers, final users want. So, most marketers this day and age, they work in small teams. Quite a lot of us work as solo marketers, or we don't actually have a lot of resources. And obviously, with a lot of things like mergers and acquisitions and economic issues, teams are getting smaller. Sometimes you're expected to do more. So AI is definitely a useful thing for to have because it can increase your productivity. It can cut time and create efficiencies for things like we can see a couple of AI note takers on this call, for example. So these are all examples of things that are good uses of AI, essentially saving us time, increasing productivity, allowing us to do more, essentially, with fewer resources. That's good. However, while marketers want to use AI for social media content specifically, and I saw research that nearly 50% of marketers expect to be using AI to create some of their social content by next year. So that tracks with the other stats about creation and curation as well. In the UK specifically, YouGov research recently said that 73% of consumers are wary of AI in content creation. So we obviously want to make our lives easier, but British consumers specifically, because in some of the countries, I suppose, excitement about AI or the concerns about AI are a bit lower. But in the UK, particularly, but also Western Europe more generally, there's a lot of wariness around AI content for a number of reasons. People just don't necessarily like it. There is an element of uncanny valley still about images and videos created using AI. Good example is last year, Coca-Cola used AI to create its famous Christmas commercial with the truck doing the rounds in a nice wintry scene. And even though it looked very much like every previous ad they did, if you go to the YouTube comments under that video, you see that there is a barrage of criticism for the fact that they used AI to make that video. Not because it was a bad video or because it was a bad advert, but because they used AI. So I think there is an element there of us having to be wary and conscious of this negativity that comes from consumers when it comes to AI. So even if you do disclose that you're using AI for something, you can expect some backlash because people aren't necessarily on board with it yet. And of course, this varies by platform, which is an interesting thing to see as well. We've noticed, for example, that if we have clients that use AI generated images on Instagram, you will automatically get loads of people with negative comments saying, why didn't you pay a proper artist? Don't use AI for this. This is rubbish. Whereas if you go to LinkedIn, there are a lot more people being optimistic about using AI for these things. In fact, just in the last couple of weeks, Google launched a new video model, VO3, and I have seen masses of very enthusiastic marketers talking about how these models will essentially change the game when it comes to video creation and advertising. But again, they're not necessarily taking into consideration the end consumer, the regular person on the street. It's very easy among marketers to be excited about this, but ultimately we need to talk to consumers and customers. And I think there is an element of people not necessarily doing that when it comes to AI because they're so excited about the possibilities. So, the other big problem for me, and this has been proven by research as well, is that now what's happening is we're about 2 years into the whole ChatGPT journey, 2.5 years, which was the first publicly available large language model chatbot. Obviously, there's lots of others now since then. But AI generated content is now being used to train large language models. So essentially, at the start, when ChatGPT first came out, the breadth of the information that it was trained on was human created content. Some of it acquired illegally. We know that there's a lot of copyrighted material that was used for training all of the large language models out there, particularly Facebook's Llama, but all of them have done some dodgy stuff in the interest of development. But the main issue here is that now what's happening is there's so much AI slop, which is what we call the just AI generated content that doesn't necessarily serve a purpose and is just volume rather than quality. That the models are now being trained on that type of content rather than the one created by humans, which means the overall quality of the stuff created by AI is lowering. Not only is the quality going down, but it's becoming more homogeneous. It's becoming less interesting. It's becoming harder for you to actually get AI to give you good stuff because the rule is garbage in, garbage out. So the more garbage is used to feed the large language models, the more they will come out with bad stuff. And I don't know if you've been using ChatGPT for a long time, but obviously every time a new model comes out, there is some adjustment periods. But more recently, there has been a lot more hallucination when it comes to asking the model questions. So hallucinations are when you ask a chatbot something and it essentially makes stuff up. And they have essentially been creating a lot of information or giving answers to people that aren't true. They are incorrect or mentioning stuff that doesn't exist. So it becomes even more important for all of us to be highly critical of any outputs from AI and become even more involved in any content that you use AI to create. And I can share some of the research on this because it's quite interesting. But again, if you want to stand out and if you want your content to be, seen by your customers as interesting, as authentic, then you need to get humans involved. So I think that there's going to be definitely a bit more room for real humans, copywriters, community managers, people responding to comments on social media that understand the context, that understand the cultural relevance of the things that are being said and can actually reply in a human way, not in a human sounding way, but in a really human way. And I think that's probably where we're going to have a sweet spot here for marketing to think about and focus on, which is focus less on human sounding things, but really think about what is human and how you can be human online. And talking about the risks, as we mentioned before, I think it's important to highlight a few of them in a bit more detail. So obviously, there is the consumer backlash, which is a major risk. It is a big issue. There is, of course, the copyright issues that we mentioned before. So at the moment, there are a number of lawsuits being brought by authors, by musicians, by artists, essentially for the reasons I mentioned before, that a lot of copyrighted work was used for training the models without the artist's consent. And there's a lot of information out there about this. Recently, of course, we've had the British government trying to pass a law as well on AI, where it would actually be an onus on the creators to tell the companies, the tech companies, that they don't want their work to be used for training AI models. So it would be an opt-out system rather than an automatic, um, you know, you can't use it thing for copyright. So they are trying to change essentially copyright law just for the AI use case. Thankfully, the House of Lords has blocked that and made amends to that particular bill, but it's going to go back to the House of Commons. The debate will continue. So it's important to keep these things in mind as well and to think about copyright, because obviously, if you as a marketer are using anything that's generated by AI and someone can prove that what you're using was based on the work that is copyrighted, then you could be opening yourself up to a lawsuit, to legal battles, and obviously brands and brand risk is something that you need to keep in mind as well. So big issue there as well. And the other thing for me, which is quite important, as I mentioned before, is bias. We know that AI has bias because the majority of the content that AI was trained on is essentially online content. Online content isn't necessarily 100% correct and accurate or representative of real life. So you have the basic biases that we talk about all the time. We were mentioning before women in engineering. If you ask a model to create an image of an engineer without giving any other specs, it will invariably create a man. Similarly, if you ask for a doctor, it will create a male doctor. If you want to create an image of a nurse, however, it will likely be a woman. So again, race is something that they don't necessarily take into consideration. The majority of the images that you will generate, if you don't specify, will be white people. So there's a number of biases that AI essentially confirms and worsens. So we need, as marketers as well, to be aware of these things and not just take it at face value. So if you are using ChatGPT to generate images, make sure that you create diverse images wherever you can, and you specify these things to make sure that the content isn't biased if you can. And there is some diversity in there. So, good examples of how you can use AI for me. Where AI really shines is data analysis, because obviously it can look at large, swathes of data and find trends and identify patterns and classify and categorize things much quicker than humans can. And that is a brilliant use case. We do it all the time at work. So we have even basic stuff like social media stats for a client. You can obviously make sure that if you're using a public chatbot where there isn't necessarily privacy and safety guarantees, which is most of them, by the way. So again, make sure that if you're putting any data into an AI model, make sure you scrub any identifiable information. So again, not just because of GDPR, but you obviously don't want any of that data to be used or exposed and used for training in the future. So you can put large, massive spreadsheets full of data into an AI model and ask it to analyze things for you. And one of my favorite use cases as well is using a tool like NotebookLM, which is one of Google's tools, as a kind of client brain, for example, or you can use it as a second brain for yourself. Why do I love NotebookLM specifically? Couple of different things that it does that I love. First, it's self-contained, so it doesn't have internet access. It's not going to look for things online. You will feed it documents and it will only look for answers in the documents you fed. So let's say you have, brand guidelines, tone of voice documents, you have previous examples of posts, you have reports showing, data from previous months or years. All of that information can be fed into NotebookLM, and then you can ask it to recommend you things or to find patterns or to tell you, have I used this before, or which bits of content have consistently performed the best over the last year. And it will tell you all that information just from looking at the things that you uploaded. It's not going to hallucinate because it's not going to go anywhere else, and it's not going to find information elsewhere. And it's always going to reference the things that you uploaded. So it'll tell you exactly which document it found that information in. So that's super useful. The other thing that NotebookLM does, which is like magic, is you can transform anything into a podcast. And it's absolutely insane because not only can you transform it into a podcast, you can transform it into a radio show where you can call in and intervene. And if you haven't done that before, please have a play because it's absolutely mind blowing. Essentially, you can ask it to like summarize all the content that you uploaded into, let's say, a 30-minute podcast, which you will do automatically. And then while the podcast is playing, you can actually interrupt it and call in like a radio show and say, oh, I'd like to ask a question. And they will actually interact with you saying, oh, it's great to have you here. What would you like to ask? And then you ask your question, and then they change what they were saying based on your input automatically by voice, real time. It's absolutely insane. Please do it if you haven't done it before. Love it. But again, it only uses the information that it has from the document you uploaded. It can also be linked to YouTube videos. So it's a great way of summarizing information. So let's say you want to link all of the marketing kind, member sessions that you had, which you can upload, but you might have some that are published publicly on YouTube. You can link those videos there, and they will actually search for it as well. But if the video has a transcript, you can also search for specific things within the video, but it has to have a transcript. But yeah, still a very powerful tool, which I love. So one that I definitely recommend to everyone. The other use for AI, which I think is great, and I think that the social media platforms are starting to jump on more, is content moderation. So obviously, there's a lot of really bad content out there online, and we talk about protecting vulnerable people all the time when it comes to things like self-harm content or obviously more heavy, horrible stuff like sexual abuse content, things like that. Content moderation is a big issue because obviously human content moderators are exposed to a lot of really, really bad things. And there have been plenty of cases of them being diagnosed with things like post-traumatic stress disorder just from the work that they do. And normally that kind of work is outsourced to developing countries as well. So to people in Africa or India who obviously don't have much of a choice. So now the platforms are starting to develop ways of using AI to be the first port of call for that moderation process, which means obviously that human moderators will have less horrible things to look at, and they will be brought in at a second stage once AI has done the first filter, which obviously means there's an element of protection there. Also, AI can obviously do this a lot faster. So if there are and AI can learn from previous examples as well. So you can feed lots of horrible sexual abuse videos into an AI model to help it identify any future instances and remove it automatically once it gets uploaded. So those are all great uses of AI. And again, one thing that is really good that you can use AI for now is enhancing the user experience by making some things that are automated sound a bit more human. So we've all probably had customer service experiences with horrible chatbots that literally are the most unhelpful thing on the planet because they have that script that they follow, and it's just infuriating because you don't really get anywhere normally with your queries. Now you can actually make those through AI, make those chatbots sound a bit more human and actually have a bit more autonomy to give you answers that aren't necessarily just from a script. So it will know from the database what it can help you with. And if it can't help you with something, it can direct you to a human straight away. But we have examples of retailers like Sephora, for example, in the US, that have used these chatbots very effectively to improve customer service rates and also to improve like in-store bookings and sales, just by making them sound a bit more conversational than your traditional scripted bots. So again, this is an area that's actually still improving and still growing, but really useful. And from a marketing and user experience perspective, of course, one that is interesting to keep an eye on. So I have been speaking for quite a while. I don't want to go into too much more detail. We have plenty of time for conversation, but I just want to leave you with one of my favorite quotes when it comes to AI, which is, I don't want AI to create my poetry or art while I do the dishes and the laundry. I want AI to do the laundry and the dishes so I have time to do my poetry and my art. So again, let's try not to outsource the good, creative, interesting stuff to AI, but the boring stuff that we don't really want to do.